Unexplained Arkansas, and this is your host, Lisa. And this week's episode is going to be number 77, and it is the last hanging in Searcy. It's the execution and crime of George Carroll. So when I did the research on the White County Courthouse, this episode that I'm covering today, I found from that research. So it's in my backyard, so to speak. And I had never heard of it, and it was very interesting, and I gave little information in the live show. But this is the full story, and there's a lot to it. But anyway, so a little business. You can contact me at unexplainedarkansas@gmail.com. So I would love to hear from you. Please go follow, leave comments anywhere you listen. If you're on YouTube, subscribe. If you want to join our Patreon, that would be great. Just reach out to me. I can send you the link. If you want a t-shirt or if you want a decal, so just reach out to me. I will send you links. It is on our website. So yeah, and I am working on a lot of new things. So a lot of new things coming, but the live show is great. Oh, and I do have Patreon business, so shout out to Belinda L. She's a new Patreon, and really appreciate all the Patreon members and that have been members, that are current members, that future members. Just appreciate you all, and I appreciate you all for listening. But so just kind of some business there. So we'll kind of get into the episode. It's an interesting one for sure. So I think that you guys will find it interesting. And then I do have some questions. I was left with some questions, which I'll, leave you with, and then you can get back to me. So how about that? Little thing right there. Okay, so on April 30th of 1886, around 2:35 p.m., a man named George Carroll would be the last man that was legally hung from the gallows in White County, Arkansas. And these gallows were in Searcy, where I live. So what led George to the gallows that day actually started in 1884 or so, but it involved lust, selfishness, and murder. And those things kind of seem to go hand in hand sometimes, unfortunately. Even in the 1800s and today, it's all the same. It's crazy. So in 1884, George Carroll and his wife Elizabeth, who went by Lizzie, so they were kind of newly, it said, living as tenant farmers in the area known as Clay, which is a farming township, or I should say was a farming township in White County, Arkansas. So Clay, and it's an area, it's not really like a city, but it's like an area or township. It's located around 9 miles north of Searcy and 60 miles northeast of Little Rock, to kind of give you guys some perspective. Little side note, so if you listen to episode 57 about the Cobbites cult, so if you'll remember, in 1876, so before this happened with George Carroll, so the Clay area was the first kind of homestead for the Cobbite cult. That was the first area that the Reverend Cobb went before he was run out of Clay, actually. And then he landed in the Gum Springs Township, which is a lot more southern or south of where he was, but very much close to where I am right now. So anyway, so go back. If you haven't listened to episode 57, go back and listen. That one was interesting. But we did go into kind of some more information there, and of course in our White County episode, so about the county and such. But long story short, Clay had a very, interesting kind of bad vibe-ish thing going on in the late 1800s. So sorry, Clay, you had some stuff going on. You had cults and what we're about to hear. So George and Lizzie, it said, had 2 children, a girl and a boy. And evidently, they were housing a woman, in their family. It said, and I heard different accounts, but her name was Viney Tidwell. And it said that she was widowed by George's half-brother. And then in another article, it said that she was a distant relative of Lizzie, George's wife. So no one really knows on that part, but I'll go with that she was widowed by George's half-brother. We'll go with that. And again, her name is Viney. So the Carrolls were described as being of a so-called poor class. They were living a hand-to-mouth existence, it said. So basically kind of working really hard just to put food on the table. And George was only 25 at this time, and Lizzie was as well, and then Viney was said to be 30, so she was just a little bit older, but we're talking very, very young. I guess in the late 1800s, I don't know what the average lifespan was. I know it's different now, but anywho, yeah, it feels young. So later on, Lizzie would actually be described as educated, earnest, and industrious. And all the things that, Proverbs 31 discusses as, a wife should be. So that was very interesting, but this all came from the newspaper, by the way. So evidently, Viney would work with George in the fields, doing whatever farming work he needed to be done. Like whatever he was doing, Viney was working with him. And then Lizzie was working solely in the home, taking care of the cooking and the cleaning and the children. And again, this is the late 1800s. Like they didn't have, and these would have been kind of a lower, class. They did not have maybe even, kind of the newer things that maybe in the 1880s people had. But we're talking no car, horse and buggy situation, no indoor plumbing, no telephone, this was very rural, very, I don't know. It doesn't sound fun, but maybe if you're into that, it would be very fun. It doesn't sound fun for me. So again, Viney was in the fields with George, and then Lizzie was in the house with the children. So neighbors would comment later on that George and Viney appeared to be very intimate. I'm sure there was a lot of tongue wagging about this. He would allegedly take her everywhere he went, and it said that he would even attend dances and take her instead of Lizzie. So, if this is true, that would definitely be a lot of red flags. Yes. So, in the early morning hours of Monday, February 2nd of 1885, so Viney found Lizzie dead at the bottom of their well. And this well was said to have a low rail fence around it, and it was said that the water was like 3 feet below where the ground was, and it was a hand-drawn bucket well. And Viney evidently called for help. The neighbors came, and then they did call the White County Sheriff, and then the sheriff would find the scene suspicious. So immediately upon getting there, it was like, not kind of feeling like what was going on was what was being told or whatever. So they went to find George Carroll in the fields to let him know of the tragedy of Lizzie, and he was working, and he was like splitting some wood, it said. And it said that he did not even seem alarmed. Like he basically didn't have any kind of reaction to it. He wasn't sad. He wasn't like what you would expect. And he even continued to finish like the job of splitting the wood. So he didn't even like stop what he was doing. So they found that suspicious, of course, and then they would find more suspicion around poor Lizzie's death based on her actual, body. So this basically was just very suspicious from the get-go, from the moment, I guess, the sheriff got there. So they do call the coroner. They had a coroner, and the coroner, when he retrieved Lizzie's body from the well, there was a lot of surprise because, of course, they're going there and they're thinking Lizzie fell into the well and maybe drowned. And it appeared like she appeared to have gone through a tremendous struggle. It said that her clothes were torn, her face, I'm switching pages, her face and head were badly bruised and beaten. They found a 4-foot stick floating in the water beside Lizzie, and on one end of that stick, there was said to be a clump of hair attached, like, to the stick that matched Lizzie's hair. With all of this, plus, the sheriffs were talking to the neighbors and kind of getting, like, kind of the 411 on everything, so it just wasn't adding up. So the coroner's jury, they called a jury together, the coroner did, and they all decided, or they were trying to figure out, like, what's going on, and they did want to see, like, what happened and likely suspects, because they were feeling that this was not just an accident right off the beginning. So after they convened, they felt the evidence was very apparent that Lizzie had been murdered, and the likely suspects were George Carroll and then Viney Tidwell. So kind of immediately that's what they went to. So the White County Sheriff does arrest both Viney and George, and they take them to the county jail. So after a day or so, Viney does get released on bail. And the community was, like, beside themselves. I mean, it's like all that they know and all that's being published in the newspaper. I mean, this is not a day for, they had nothing else but the newspaper. So the newspapers are, reporting everything, and they were just upset. So it said that, an angry mob got together and actually went to the jail to find George, because they were going to take justice into their own hands, and they were going to lynch George. And, basically George was saved by the authorities in custody. They did save him from the angry mob, but, like, people were very upset. Like, all they know is that he killed his young wife. That's all. There is no, like, presumption of innocence. I mean, it was just like, they're guilty and we're going to take, justice into our own hands. This is very similar to the Cobbite situation, if you'll remember in the Cobbite situation. So angry mobs were a very big factor in the late 1800s. Just saying. It was a crazy time. So Viney, upon being questioned about all of this by the authorities, so she does come clean to them, and she states her truth. So she states to the police that George was wanting to get rid of Lizzie because he was in love with her, Viney. And so he decided at first to kill Lizzie by making it look like an accident while working on the chimney. Like, basically he was going to make Lizzie help him with this chimney that he was building on their house and just make it look like she fell. So that was his big plan. So his plan, according to Viney, was to push the ladder away while Lizzie was up on the roof, and then to strike her with a stone, making it look like she fell off the roof and then she died. So this plan was put into motion. However, a neighbor ended up coming by unannounced and actually went up on the roof and started helping Lizzie with the chimney, like foiling George's plan. So that plan was no longer viable. So with that plan gone, George then comes to Viney on February 1st and tells her another plan. So that he says that he was going to drown Lizzie in their well the next day, so the next morning, and Viney would need to find her body after he left to go work out on the farm. So basically he was going to do the deed and then kind of signal Viney, and then Viney was the one that actually needed to, quote unquote, find Lizzie. So Viney would later recant that when she heard George call Lizzie out to the well, I mean, she knew exactly what his plan was. So when she heard him call Lizzie out to to draw some water, and this was like a Monday morning, February 2nd, So Viney says she threw herself on the bed and covered her ears because she did not want to hear the awful death cries that she feared would come from Lizzie. So she knew what was happening. She didn't want to stop it, and yet she, quote unquote, did not want to hear it. But she did what she was told, and she did allow George to kill Lizzie, and then she did go find the body, and she did not alert the neighbors. Like George had kind of told her, like, give it a minute, like, let me get out to the fields to, look like I was working. So do not alert the neighbors right away, like, give me a minute. So she literally waited half an hour before she went and told the neighbors about, Lizzie being dead. So as Viney states, this was because she did this because she was scared that George would kill her also. So that's what she was worried about. So George, he's arrested. He's been, indicted. So his trial begins. So this happened in February. His trial begins in July. So of 1885, I almost said 1985, of 1885. So the state produces several witnesses to kind of collaborate the stories, probably the gossip and such. And then before the state closes, they do call Viney to the stand. And she does tell them everything she had told the sheriff's office, which completely sealed the deal on George's fate. So he was deemed to be guilty of murder in the first degree and sentenced to death by hanging by September of 1885. So this was July. So it was not really, basically it was kind of like maybe a 2-day trial. It wasn't very long. And then they right away, they didn't kind of say how he would be executed. Like they didn't sentence him until maybe in August. And then they literally decided that they would hang him by September. Pretty fast. So the prosecutor did decide to dismiss the case against Viney as far as being involved, since she helped secure the guilty verdict on George. So basically she turned state witness to get out of being in trouble herself, but really the prosecutors felt like they did not have enough evidence to really try her, but she helped them to convict George. So George's attorneys did file appeals, and they went all the way to the Arkansas Supreme Court. But the October 16th of 1885, the Arkansas Supreme Court did uphold the verdict against George and the death sentence. So, and many people, it didn't say who these people were, if they were family or friends or maybe just advocates in the community, but many people, it said, did come forward and ask and plead for George to not be killed and have his sentence commuted out. However, by March of 1886, so we're rolling into the next year, the governor of Arkansas, and this is at the time, his name was Simon Hughes, and he is, I believe that he's the 15th governor of the state, and he stated that he definitely was not going to commute the death sentence, and that if any one person deserved a death sentence, it was George Carroll. And the crime was, it was very heinous. This is the death of a young woman, a mother, all because he was having this horrible affair, and there's just more information to come. So they do set the final execution date for George as April 30th of 1886. So obviously George was, he is set to be executed. I'm sure he's not thrilled about this. So as it got closer, I guess he was just extremely concerned. So on Saturday, April 24th, so a few days, 6 days out from the execution, with the help evidently of a jailer, George does escape the jail. So he is gone. He is left. So the sheriff at the time, his last name is Ford. So upon finding this out, the sheriff leaps into action. They get all the people, together all the authorities, and they're just on the hunt for George. So they do apprehend George right away, like by the next day, and put him back in jail. So basically he was out for maybe 24 hours or so is how long he was on the run. It doesn't say anything about where he went or where they caught him. And again, this is horse and buggy days. This is not a getaway car situation. It did say, according to an according to an article found in the Arkansas Democrat, a jailer named Pemberton was arrested as well and was being watched closely because he was evidently the one responsible for helping George out of jail. So, interesting tidbit there. So there was one article that states that George kind of had an extremely restless night before before the night of the hanging, but it said that he showed great nerve on the day of. And then another article states that he fully confessed to the deed as he was on, the scaffold. So stating that he did it due to the influence by Viney, and that he was forgiven now because he had confessed of his sin and he had asked for forgiveness in a letter made to a Reverend E.A. Garrison. So this was said of George like on the actual day of, April 30th. So it does say that George left the White County Jail, which the jail is around the courthouse area of Searcy. We went into that a lot in the last episodes about the courthouse, but it is downtown Searcy. And it said that the actual, area where they were hanging people was 1 mile from the courthouse. So in order to get there, basically they would put people, the people that they were going to execute, they would put on top of their coffin, and then they would, go down, they would be taken down to the area where they were hanging. So it said that George himself rode on top of his coffin, and that it was carted from the jail the mile to the hanging tree, which the hanging tree, I will post all of my information that I have found about the hanging tree, about the location. The tree is no longer there. Portions of the tree was there in 1997, the late 90s. So again, I will post everything that I have found there. But this hanging tree was located on Gin Creek, right beside where Berry Hill Park is. So currently we have a really nice pickleball facility on in Berry Hill Park of Gin Creek, and then on the opposite side we do have our Searcy's Head Start. So it said the tree, it used to be in between the Head Start and then the Searcy swimming pool. And the swimming pool is no longer there. But yes, so that's where George was kind of carted down to. And it does say that he was, along the way, down from the jail to, the hanging site, that he was waving. He was waving at everybody, that's what was going on. It's really hard to imagine. I can't even, it's hard, I don't know, it's just hard to imagine. So it said that 3,000 people attended his hanging. And we kind of discussed, in the live show episodes that, hangings were encouraged, for people to be there. They wanted them to be a public spectacle. The goal of it being, if the public saw this, then less people would actually commit these heinous crimes. And another thing, we talked about, this was, the people were mad. It was kind of he killed his wife, mother to his kids, and he killed her in an extremely heinous way, by holding her, pushing her in this well and holding her head under, essentially, with this stick, and just, just what a horrible way to die. So people were literally screaming for him to be, killed. They were excited to watch this. They were extremely happy that he was going to be executed. Like, this was what they wanted. I mean, they had almost killed him themselves. So this was what they wanted. So it does say, I did find an article that was kind of written like basically from a remembrance. So a woman named Mary Rice Reynolds would tell an Eddie Best, who was a member of the White County Historical Society, that her grandmother, when she was 7, witnessed the hanging. Evidently, she was taken to the hanging by her aunt, and she remembered her aunt screaming, "Let me up there, I will pull the rope." Like, she was wanting this to be done. Like, there was just no ifs, ands, and buts. Like, yeah, this was going to happen. So again, this was something that people attended, something that they were on board from. They were angry. They were angry at George, at what he did. So again, even in the article, Mary Rice Reynolds, she mentions she couldn't imagine, taking a child to such an event. I mean, it was just a very different time and place. 1886 of it all. So, again, a wild, wild place. I mean, you had cults chopping heads off people, and then you had lynch mobs taking justice into their own hands. This was actual justice because like I said, the lynch mob really wanted to take care of this situation. So, it is alleged, and not in any of the newspaper articles. So I did take the factual information from newspaper articles, and I will be posting all my references. But a little hearsay, a little backstory was allegedly the reason why George wanted to kill Lizzie was allegedly Viney was pregnant. And who knows if that's real? Nothing was confirmed about such at all. Nothing mentioned a child being born, after he was, convicted or whatever, some time had passed. So I don't know if that is, real or not, but that was something that was mentioned. It is also lore that after George was hung, a mob wanted Viney dead as well. They wanted her hung. They wanted to get her. So they ended up going, evidently, and this information came from another, a Mrs. Wright. So she had spoken to people of the White County Historical Society and a W.E. Orr had kind of taken some information. So she had mentioned that a mob went and talked to, like, maybe her dad or granddad, I believe, and someone in the Wright family, and they were trying to find Viney. Like, these people, the Wrights, lived in the Clay area, so they were trying to find Viney, but evidently Viney had heard what the mob wanted to do, and so she was able to escape town before they got to her, and evidently they chased her down as far as Newport. Like, Viney got to Newport, which is about, I don't know, it's northeast of Searcy. So, and back in there would have been trains running, that you would have a train option. So I don't know if she caught a train and went to Newport, because you definitely like a horse and buggy would have taken forever, or by foot, because Newport, even in a car, it takes a good 45 minutes from Searcy. So just note that. But evidently they allegedly chased her all the way to Newport, but no one ever saw Viney ever again. So no one knew what happened to her, really. So no one knows. I will say, I tried to find any information I could about any of these people in the ancestry documents, and there is nothing. And George Carroll was a very popular name. But there was zero, reference to George. I could not find Lizzie. Kind of looked up different things. So there was no record of them. Nothing of Viney. I did try to look up her as well. So just the 1880s of it all. They would have been born around the 60s. Viney would have been like 1855-ish. So couldn't find that. The other thing that was never mentioned at all in all this was what happened to the Carroll's kids. Like, it said that they had a girl and a boy. There's no mention of their ages, what happened to them. Like, the newspaper articles went in a lot about George and about what was going on, but it never mentioned the kids. So I don't know if that was like a privacy thing, like a nice privacy thing. I don't know if they had family that they got the kids to, I hope, or I don't know what happened to the kids, but nothing was ever mentioned about the children. So that was interesting. So that's a question, like, what happened to the kids? Like, really? Because they lost their mom and their dad really quickly. So, and then a big question is, again, what happened to Viney? Evidently, she made it to Newport. So that's interesting, but we don't know. So kind of, again, that's kind of the most curious thing to me. Another thing that really bothered me was, and I spent a lot of time trying to track down this information, but where did they bury executed bodies? So, the only cemetery, quote unquote, in Searcy, at least at this time, the 1880s of it all, was like the Oak Grove Cemetery. There would have been some cemeteries, like Smyrna Church had a cemetery, and has a cemetery, and then there is a church, kind of like where the Cobbites ended up landing in Gum Springs. Like, there is a church and cemetery out there. So I did try to find where George was buried, where Lizzie would have been buried, because obviously they buried George. So I did go all through the Oak Grove Cemetery, and of course there's some really nice headstones from like the late 1800s. I mean, you have all of like the town people that had, done a lot, and the community and White County and all the, all of the families that were like leaders in the community. Like, they're very upfront in the Oak Grove Cemetery. Like, you can find them, and then of course there's their families. So it's like, obviously they're not going to spend a lot of money on, George's tombstone. They're just not. And they're not going to put him up there with all of these, so-called, pillars of the community. So where did they put him? So that is a huge question. So where is George buried? And where is Lizzie buried? And then, what happened to their kiddos? Like, these are questions that, unfortunately, I couldn't come by. And luckily there were newspaper articles that could at least, fill in some blanks to this whole kind of wild, horrible tale. But there was no like obituary for Lizzie that I could find. Yeah, and there have been so many things over the years. Like, if you go back and look at the Searcy Daily Citizens, even the newspapers of the time, it gets pretty spotty beyond like 1922. So even if you go to the library and look at things and whatnot. So did try to look at some cemetery lists, because you also have like the Mount Pisgah Cemetery, and so again, still searching for where George could be buried. Like, where would you put an executed body in White County? So again, George was listed as the last legal hanging, and they make a point to say legal hanging. So that is a question too, like how many hangings happened that were illegal? Because like I said, they wanted to lynch George, they wanted to lynch Viney. Like, they got kind of quote unquote lucky that they weren't murdered even before they got put in jail. So I did find a note that her bail, that they did set bail for her at $1,000, and that would be a whole lot of money back then. So that's curious to me. It's like, who put up her bail? So there are a lot of questions here, guys. Like, what happened to the children? Where is George buried? Who put up Viney's bail money? Now, I will say, on this same day in Arkansas, so literally that April 30th of 1886, so That same day in Arkansas, there was another hanging in the town of Morrilton. And we've talked about Morrilton before, like I just did, of course, the episode on Kristen Laurite. And so we went into some Morrilton discussions there. So Morrilton is kind of west of Searcy area. But that same day, a doctor was actually hung. And that was quite interesting. So it was George hung in White County, and then this doctor was hung in Morrilton for his misdoings. And I did not dive into his case at this point, but it's just something. It's yeah. So last legal hanging, I did go. Like I said, the tree was, down on the corner. It's kind of like the corner of Moss and Moore and Searcy, and so that is the Head Start and where the old Searcy swimming pool is. So I went to see it myself. You can kind of see where the tree stood, and I'll go check out, like, once I post this episode, I will also be posting pictures and such, so you can go check that out. But yeah, so just kind of give me some feedback on this, guys. Let me know what you think about this, but maybe let me know how you feel about no plumbing and no phones, and it's just odd. It's just an odd time frame. So, horrible, heinous crime perpetrated in 1885, just because you fall in love with a woman that's living with you that just wasn't a great idea. So, and I hate it for Lizzie. I hate it for their children, but that's what happened to George Carroll. So, give me your thoughts. Leave me with some tidbits and let me know what you think. So I do have a lot of upcoming content, of course. So like next Monday, the next week, I will have the Gal Row. Finally re-recording that. And I say re-recording, you guys know all about that. And then just have a lot planned coming up and for 2025. And of course, I'll keep you guys posted on live events with me. So yay. So please listen, share, and be looking for some exciting new things coming your way, okay? And have a great week. Bye. See you later.
So they then decided to go to a spot in Arkansas, Texas. Like I said, okay, very disturbing. Now they're moving into this. Unexplained.